Hello, it's another day, and I'm Sunko, and today is October 20th, and I'm about to read a book. I was reading chapter 13 yesterday, and I was thinking of changing the book, but then I decided to keep reading it for a while to see how the story goes. But then, if the story um, turns out to be bad, then I'm going to change it right away. We'll see how it goes. But for real, at this point, what I'm thinking is that it's not as fun as I thought it would be. But I'm taking into consideration of changing the book. Just to let you know, it's not a big deal, but yeah, mm, it's getting a bit dragging. You know what I mean? Okay. Anyway. But some day or other, we should find means of going away, sooner perhaps than you imagine, my friends, remarked the engineer. If Lincoln Island is but a medium distance from an inhabited island or from a continent, we shall know in an hour. I have not a map of the Pacific, but my memory has preserved a very clear recollection of its southern part. Southern part, latitude which I obtained yesterday, placed New Zealand to the west of Lincoln Island and the coast of Chile to the east. But between these two countries there is a distance of at least 6,000 miles. It has therefore to be determined what point in this great space the island occupies, and this the longitude will give us presently, with a sufficient approximation, I hope. Is not the archipelago of the Paumotus the nearest point to us in latitude? Asked Herbert. Yes, replied the engineer, but the distance which separates us from it is more than 1,200 miles. And that way, asked Nabbs, who followed the conversation with extreme interest, pointing to the south. That way, nothing, replied Pencroft. Nothing indeed, added the engineer, while Cyrus asked the reporter, if Lincoln Island is not more than 2 or 3 thousand miles from New Zealand or Chile? Well, replied the engineer, instead of building a house, we will build a boat, and Master Pencroft shall be put in command. Well then, cried the sailor, I'm quite ready to be captain, as soon as you can make a craft that's able to keep at sea. We shall do it if it is necessary, replied Cyrus Harding. But while these men, who really hesitated at nothing, were talking, the hour approached at which the observation was to be made. What Cyrus Harding was to do to ascertain the passage of the sun at the meridian of the island, without an instrument of any sort, Herbert could not guess. The observers were then about 6 miles from Chimneys, not far from that part of the downs in which the engineer had been found after his enigmatical preservation. They halted at this place and prepared for breakfast. For it was half past 11. Herbert went for some fresh water from a stream which ran near, and brought it back in a jug, which Nab had provided. During these preparations Harding arranged everything for his astronomical observation. He chose a clear place on the shore, which the ebbing tide had left perfectly level. This bed of fine sand was as smooth as ice, not a grain out of place. It was of little importance whether it was horizontal or not, and it did not matter much whether the stick 6 feet high, which was planted there, rose perpendicularly. On the contrary, the engineer inclined it towards the south, that is to say, in the direction of the coast opposite to the sun. For it must not be forgotten that the settlers in Rincon Island, as the island was situated in the southern hemisphere, saw the radiant planet describe its diurnal arc above the northern and not above the southern horizon. Hubble now understood how the engineer was going to proceed to ascertain the culmination of the sun, that is to say, its passing the meridian of the island, or in other words, determine due south. It was by means of the shadow coast, cast on the sand by the stick, a way which, for want of an instrument, would give him a suitable approach to the result which he wished to obtain. In fact, the moment when this shadow would reach its minimum of length would be exactly 12 o'clock, and it would be enough to watch the extremity of the shadow so as to ascertain the instant when, after having successively diminished, it began to lengthen. By inclining his stick to the side opposite to the sun, Cyrus Harding made the shadow longer, and consequently its modifications would be more easily ascertained. In fact, the longer the needle of a dial is, the more easily can the movement of its point be followed. The shadow of the stick was nothing but the needle of a dial. The moment had come, and Cyrus Harding knelt on the sand, and with little wooden packs which he stuck into the sand, he began to mark the successive diminutions of the stick's shadow. His companions, bending over him, watched the operation with extreme interest. The reporter held his chronometer in his hand, ready to tell the hour which he marked when the shadow would be at its shortest. Moreover, as Cyrus Harding was working on the 16th of April, the day on which the true and the average time are identical, the hour given by Gideon's bill would be the true hour then at Washington, which would simplify the calculation. Meanwhile, as the sun slowly advanced, the shadow slowly diminished, and when it appeared to Cyrus Harding that it was beginning to increase, he asked, "What o'clock is it?" 1 minute past 5, replied Gideon Spilett directly. They had now only to calculate the operation. Nothing could be easier. It could be seen that there existed, in round numbers, a difference of 5 hours between the meridian of Washington and that of Lincoln Island. That is to say, it was midday in Lincoln Island when it was already 5 o'clock in the evening in Washington. Now the sun, in its apparent movement round the earth, traverses 1 degree in 4 minutes, or 15 degrees an hour. 15 degrees multiplied by 5 hours gives 75 degrees. Then, since Washington is 77 degrees, uh, as much as to say 77 degrees counted from the meridian of Greenwich, which the Americans take for their starting point for longitude concurrently with the English, it followed that the island must be situated 77 and 75 degrees west of the meridian of Greenwich, that is to say, on the 152nd degree of west longitude. Cyrus Harding announced this result to his companions, and taking into consideration errors of observation as he had done for latitude, he believed he could positively affirm that the position of Lincoln Island was between the 35th and the 37th parallel, and between the 105th and 155th meridian to the west of the meridian of Greenwich. The possible faults which he attributed to errors in the observation was, it may be seen, of 5 degrees on both sides, which at 60 miles to the degree would give an error of 300 miles in latitude and longitude for the exact position. But this error would not influence the determination which it was necessary to take. It was very evident that Lincoln Island was at such a distance from every country or island that it would be too hazardous to attempt to reach one in a freight boat. In fact, this calculation placed it at least 1,200 miles from Tahiti and the islands of the archipelago of the Prometheus, more than 1,800 miles from New Zealand, and 4,500 miles from the American coast. And when Cyrus Harding consulted his memory, he could not remember in any way that such an island occupied in that part of the Pacific the situation assigned to Lincoln Island. Chapter 15. The next day, the 17th of April, the sailor's first words were addressed to Gideon Spilett. Well, sir, he asked, what shall we do today? What the captain poses, replied the reporter. Till then, the engineer's companions had been brick makers and potters. Now they were to become metallurgists. The day before, after breakfast, they had explored as far as the point of Mandible Cape, 7 miles distant from the Chimneys. There, the long series of downs ended, and the soil had a volcanic appearance. There were no longer high cliffs, as at Prospect Heights, but a strange and capricious border which surrounded the narrow gulf between the two capes, formed of mineral matter thrown up by the volcano. Arrived at this point, the settlers retraced their steps, and at nightfall entered the Chimneys. But they did not sleep before the question of knowing whether they could think of leaving Lincoln Island or not was definitely settled. The 1,200 miles which separated the island from the Paumatus Island was a considerable distance. A boat could not cross it, especially at the approach of the bad season. Pencroft had expressly declared this. Now to construct a simple boat, even with the necessary tools, was a difficult work, and the colonists not having tools, they must begin by making hammers, axes, adzes, august, planes, etc., which would take some time. It was decided, therefore, that they would winter at Lincoln Island, and that they would look for a more comfortable dwelling than the Chimneys, in which to pass the winter months. Before anything else could be done, it was necessary to make the iron ore, of which the engineer had observed some traces in the northwest part of the island, fit for use by converting it either into iron or into steel. Metals are not generally found in the ground in a pure state. For the most part, they are combined with oxygen or sulfur. Such was the case with the two specimens which Cyrus Harding had brought back, one of magnetic iron, not carbonated, the other a pyrite, also called sulfulant of iron. It was therefore the first, the oxide of iron, which they must reduce with coal, that is to say, get rid of the oxygen to obtain it in a pure state. This reduction is made by subjecting the ore with coal to a high temperature, either by the rapid and easy Catlin method, which has the advantage of transforming the ore into iron in a single operation, or by the blast furnace, which first melts the ore, then changes it into iron by carrying away the 3 to 4% of core which is combined with it. Now Cyrus Harding wanted iron, and he wished to obtain it as soon as possible. The ore which he had picked up was in itself very pure and rich. It was the oxidolus iron, which is found in confused masses of a deep gray color. It gives a black dust, crystallized in the form of the regular octahedron. Native lodestone consists of this ore. An iron of the first quality is made in Europe from that wood which Sweden and Norway are so abundantly supplied. Not far from this vein was the vein of coal already made use of by the settlers. The ingredients for the manufacture being close together would greatly facilitate the treatment of the ore. This is the cause of the wealth of the mines in Great Britain, where the coal aids the manufacture of the metal extracted from the same soil, at the same time as itself. Then Captain said Pencroft, we are going to work iron ore? Yes, my friend, replied the engineer, and for that something which will please you, we must begin by having a seal hunt on the island. A seal hunt, cried the sailor, turning toward Gideon Spilett. Are seals needed to make iron? Since Cyrus has said so, replied the reporter. But the engineer had already left the Chimneys, and Pencroft prepared for the seal hunt, without having received any other explanation. Without Cyrus Harding, Herbert, Gideon Spilett, Nab, and the sailor were soon collected on the shore at a place where the channel left a ford passable at low tide. The hunters could therefore traverse it without getting wet higher than the knee. Harding Dan put his foot on the elet for the first, and his companions for the second time. On their landing, some hundreds of penguins looked fearlessly at them. The hunters armed with sticks could have killed them easily, but they were not guilty of such useless massacre, as it was important not to frighten the seals, who were lying on the sand several cable lengths off. They also respected certain innocent looking birds whose wings were reduced to the shade of stumps spread out like fins ornamented with feathers of a scaly appearance. The settlers therefore prudently advanced towards the north point, walking over ground riddled with little holes, which formed nests for the seabirds. Towards the extremity of the islet appeared great black heads floating just above the water, having exactly the appearance of rocks in motion. These were the seals which were to be captured. It was necessary, however, first to allow them to land, for with their clothes, short hair, and their fusiform conformation being excellent swimmers, it is difficult to catch them in the sea, while on land their short, webbed feet prevent their having more than a slow, waddling movement. Pencroft knew the habits of these creatures, and he advised waiting till they were stretched on the sand. When the sun, before long, was saying them to sleep, they must then manage to cut off their retreat and knock them on the head. The hunters, having concealed themselves behind rocks, waited silently. An hour passed before the seals came to play on the sand. They could count half a dozen. Pencroft and Herbert then went round the point of the islet so as to take them in the rear and cut off their retreat. During this time Cyrus Harding, Spud, and Nab, crawling behind the rocks, glided towards the future scene of combat. All at once the tall figure of the sailor appeared. Pencroft shouted. The engineer and his two companions drew themselves between the sea and the sails. Two of the animals soon lay dead on the sand, but the rest regained the sea in safety. "Here are the seals acquired, Captain," said the sailor, advancing towards the engineer. "Capital," replied Harding. "We will make billows of 'em." "Billows!" cried Pencroft. "Well, these are lucky seals." It was in fact a blowing machine, necessary for a treatment of the ore, that the engineer wished to manufacture with the skins of the amphibious creatures. They were of a medium size, for their length did not exceed 6 feet. They resembled a dog about the head. As it was useless to burden themselves with the weight of both the animals, Neb and Pencroft resolved to skin them on the spot, while Cyrus Harding and the reporter continued to explore the islet. The sailor and the negro cleverly performed the operation. In 3 hours afterwards, Cyrus Harding had at his disposal two sealskins, which he intended to use in this state, without subjecting them to any tanning process. The sailors waited till the tide was again low, and crossing the channel, they entered the Chimneys. The skins had then to be stretched on a frame of wood, and soon by means of fibers so as to preserve the air, without allowing too much to escape. Cyrus Harding had nothing but the two steel blades from Top's collar, and yet he was so clever, and his companions aided him with so much intelligence, that 3 days afterwards the little colony stock of tools was augmented by a blowing machine, destined to inject the air into the midst of the ore when it should be subjected to heat, an indispensable condition to the success of the operation. On the morning of the 20th of April began the metallic period. As reporter quoted in his notes, the engineer had decided, as has been said, to operate near the veins both of coal and ore. Now, according to his observations, these veins were situated at the foot of the northeast spurs of Mount Franklin, that is to say, a distance of 6 miles from their home. It was impossible, therefore, to return every day to the Chimneys, and it was agreed that the little colony should camp under a hut of branches so that the important operation could be followed night and day. This settled, they set out in the morning. Nab and Pencroft dragged the billows on hurdle, also a quantity of vegetables and animals, which they besides could renew on the way. The road led through Jacamar Wood, which they traversed obliquely from southeast to the northwest, and in the thickest parts it was necessary to beat a path which would in the future form the most direct road to Prospect Heights and Mount Franklin. The trees belonging to the species already discovered were magnificent. Herbert found some new ones, among others some which Pencroft called shamlicks, for in spite of their size they were of the same liliaceous family as the onion, chive, shallot, or asparagus. These trees produce leavenous roots which, when cooked, are excellent. From them by fermentation a very agreeable liquor is made. They therefore made a good store of the roots. The journey through the wood was long. It lasted the whole day, and so allowed plenty of time for examining the flora and fauna. Top, who took special charge of the fauna, ran through the grass and brushwood, putting up all sorts of game. Hub and Ginsburg killed two kangaroos with bows and arrows, and also an animal which strongly resembled both a hedgehog and an anteater. It was like the first because it rolled itself into a ball and bristled with spines. Oh, oh. And when it is in the pot, asked Pencroft naturally, what will it be like? An excellent piece of beef, replied Herbert. We will not ask more from it, replied the sailor. During this excursion they saw several wild boars, which, however, did not offer to attack the little band, and it appeared as if they would not meet with any dangerous beast. When in a thick part of the wood, the reporter thought he saw some paces from him, among the lower branches of a tree, an animal which he took for a bear, and which he very tranquilly began to draw. Happily for Giddenspool, the animal in question did not belong to the redoubtable family of the plantigrades. It was only a koala, better known under the name of the sloth, being about the size of a large dog, and having stiff hair of a dirty color. The paws are armed with strong claws, which enabled it to climb trees and feed on leaves. Having identified the animal which they did not disturb, Ginsburg erased Bear from the title of his sketch, putting Koala in its place, and the journey was resumed. At 5 o'clock in the evening, Cyrus Harding gave the signal to halt. They were now outside the forest, at the beginning of the powerful spurs which supported Mount Franklin towards the west. At a distance of some 100 feet flowed the Rat Creek, and consequently plenty of fresh water was within their reach. The camp was soon organized. In less than an hour, on the edge of the forest, among the trees, a hut of branches interlaced with creepers and pasted over with clay offered a tolerable shelter. Their geological researches were put off till the next day. Supper was prepared. A good fire blazed before huts. The rows turned, and 8 o'clock, while one of the settlers watched to keep up the fire, in case any wild beast should prowl in the neighborhood. The other slept soundly. The next day, the 21st of April, Cyrus Harding, accompanied by Herbert, went to look for a soil of ancient formation, on which he had already discovered a specimen of ore. They found the vein above ground, near the source of the creek, at the foot of one of the northeastern spurs. This ore, very rich in iron, enclosed in a fusible veinstone, was perfectly suited to the mode of reduction which the engineer intended to employ. That is, the Catalan method, but simplified, as it is used in Corsica. In fact, the Catalan method, properly so called, requires the construction of kilns and cubicles in which the ore and the coal, placed in alternate layers, are transformed and reduced. But Cyrus Harding intended to economize these constructions and wished to form, with the ore and the coal, a cubing mass, to the center of which he would direct the wind from his bellows. Doubtless it was the proceeding employed by Tubal-Cain and the first metallurgists of the inhabited world. Now that which he had succeeded with the grandson of Adam, and which so yielded good results in countries which in ore and fuel could not but succeed with the settlers in Lincoln Island. The coal, as well as the ore, was collected without trouble on the surface of the ground into little pieces hanging from the impurities which surface. Then coal and ore were shaken successively as the charcoal with the wood which he wishes. In this way, under the influence of the air projected by the blowing machine, the coal would be transformed into carbonic acid, then into oxide of carbon, its use being to reduce the oxide of the oxygen. Here proceeded. The blows of sealskin, furnished at its extremity with a nozzle of clay, which had been previously fabricated in the pottery kiln, was established near the heap of ore. Using the mechanism, which consisted of a frame, cords of fiber, and counterpoise, he threw it into the mass of an abundance of air, which by raising the temperature also concur with the chemical transformation to produce in time pure iron. The operation was difficult. All the patience, all the ingenuity of the sailors was needed, but at last they succeeded, and the result was a lump of iron reduced to a spongy state, which it was necessary to shingle and faggot, that is to say, to forge so as to expel from it the liquefied vein stone. These amateur smiths had, of course, no hammer, but they were in no worse a situation than the first metallurgist, and therefore did what no doubt he had to do. A handle was fixed to the first lump and was used as hammer to forge the second on a granite anvil, and thus they obtained a coarse but useful metal. At length, after many trials and much fatigue, on the 25th of April, several bars of iron were forged and transformed into tools, crowbars, pincers, pickaxes, spades, etc., which Pencroft and Nab declared to be real jewels. But the metal was not yet in its most serviceable state, that is, of steel. Now, steel is a combination of iron and coal, which is extracted either from the liquid ore by taking from it the axis of core, or from the iron by adding to it the coal which was wanting. The first, obtained by the decarburation of the metal, gives natural or puddled steel. The second, produced by the carburation of the iron, gives steel of cementation. It was last which Cyrus Harding intended to forge, as he possessed iron in a pure state. He succeeded by heating the metal with powder coal in a crucible which had previously been manufactured from clay suitable for the purpose. He then worked the steel, which is malleable both when hot or cold, with the hammer. Neb and Pencroft, cleverly directed, made the hatches, which heated red hot, and plunged suddenly into cold water, acquired an excellent temper. Other instruments, of course roughly fashioned, were also manufactured: blades for planes, axes, hatchets, pieces of steel to be transformed into saws, chisels, then iron for spades, pickaxes, hammers, nails, etc. At last, on the 5th of May, the tally period ended. The smiths returned to the chimneys, and new work would soon authorize them to take a fresh title. Okay, end of chapter 15. Chapter 16. Oh my, it's really hard reading for real. Okay, see you tomorrow, and bye.